guys, welcome back. A little late on this one, Valentine's Day edition. Ursula and I are playing catch up here because somehow 2 weeks elapsed and neither one of us noticed it. So I think Ursula apparently wants to talk about Valentine's Day.
It's
better
Valentine's
be weightlifting related.
Day. Yeah, no, it is. No, I got a message from one of my athletes, and she said, are we going to have, she couldn't make it to training yesterday. She's like, are we going to have training tomorrow since it's a holiday?
It's not a
and
real
I was
holiday.
like,
get out of here.
But I didn't even know what she was talking about. I'm like, holiday? What holiday? She's like, Valentine's Day. I'm like, oh, yeah, no. We're having training. That's not a holiday.
Seriously.
We don't even, I mean, I'll have training on any day if I'm available.
Exactly.
So it has nothing to do, I didn't even know it was the 14th. Happened to me twice a day.
If your significant other is going to get that upset about you training on Valentine's Day, they don't really love you anyway.
Yeah, and you got the wrong person in your life.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Beat it.
Get rid of, dump
no one
them
likes
now.
you anyway.
That's what we call in relationships a flag.
Yes. I think we talked about that in the very first episode.
Yeah.
How to properly choose your significant other.
Yes.
They have to actually be significant.
Well, and there should be a genetic component. Like you should be able to contribute to my current gene pool and produce an improved specimen.
Oh boy. All right.
You know, that type of speak I got from my very first coach, and I wanted to say something about it. It wasn't I had a coach, and then I had he moved to Tokyo. And I know it sounds like they were just fleeing from me, but they weren't. They had their own things going on. That's why they were leaving. And then I had another coach, and he moved to Nebraska. And then really my third coach in line was a guy named Angel Spasov, who was from Bulgaria. And I just wanted to note that because he passed away Saturday, and wanted to just mention that. A lot of people know who he is. Not a lot of people know what transpired, but rest in peace, Coach.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, they always, coaches have a significant impact on your life. He coached me for almost 3 years, 2.5, about from 90 to 92. So it was a significant amount of time. And even, 2 or 3 years may not seem like, in the scheme of like a 30-year time frame in weightlifting, it was significant just because of the amount of time that you spend with a coach. And he was, I think, the only coach I ever had that I was like with day in, day out, ate meals with. He taught me like the way a relationship between an athlete and coach really should be developed, which is on a multitude of levels, and to this day, I still try to practice that as opposed to just being a trainer where you see that person for an hour a day and then you go about your life and you really don't interact with them otherwise. He used to make me tea before training every day I would train. And he was always integrating, life lessons into our training. And he would sit next to me, through the entire training session. And it was just me and him most of the time. So anyways.
All I do is count reps for my lifters and then make them leave.
That's not true.
Make your own tea.
True. Yeah.
No one likes you. Yeah, that's not true. But yeah, that's all really good things for, I think, new coaches to understand, is that there's so much more to coaching than putting together a program, sending it out, doing some technique work. And I think, lifters like Jess Lucero and Amy Hay are perfect examples of that. And you really see how a lifter like that, who has all the physical potential in the world, get it together.
It's not me. I'm not calling myself. I hung up on me. Happy?
This is why we can't have nice things.
I know. And my dog's going to bark. My child's going to come from school. It's just going to be horrible.
Yeah, we should probably just retire from this podcast.
Don't think we didn't contemplate it this afternoon. Like if
this afternoon, it's been pretty much every day.
That's you.
That's right. I didn't want to do it in the first place.
I had to drag Greg for kicking and screaming. Y'all are welcome.
Yeah.
And
Thank Ursula.
I get bitched at all the time about it. It's like, where I want to share the messages that go back and forth between us. I think I have once. They're ridiculous.
You did once, yeah.
Yeah. I'll keep the rest private. They're pretty hilarious, so.
Okay, well, enough about how amazing we are and how much we love doing this podcast. let's talk about Peter's question.
All right,
fudge. All right. Peter says, hey guys, emailed this question recently, I assumed to Catalyst Athletics, but I don't remember seeing it. But I was hoping you could speak to it a bit more. I've recently had problems, quote, clarking heavy snatches and cleans. For those of you who aren't familiar with that term, that means you basically bail out of the lift partway through, usually during the pull. During the lift, you just refuse to pull under the bar. I know it's a mental problem, probably a recovery thing too. Just wondering if any of you have had this problem. Mine's been a problem for over a year now at weights 90 to 100%. I used to have no problem getting under anything. It was other problems, but now I just can't get under anything on heavy days. Thoughts or ways to address? High blocks?
He's got his own answer.
But I just like he said high
answer,
blocks like HI, like high blocks, like he's saying hello to them.
Oh, hello to the blocks. I have two things to add, and neither of which is going to be helpful.
Let's just do a full episode one of these days of the least helpful answers we can provide.
Useless information. We're not far from it. Ken Clark is the lifter that's named after, which is a shame because he was a really, really good lifter.
Yeah, don't ever use that term in front of Jim Schmitz because he will eviscerate you for that.
Yeah, and then give you the whole history of how successful Ken Clark was, because he was.
Exactly.
And then, it's just kind of crappy that you go through your whole career really successful and then you're known for something like that. But we all do that in the gym. We attribute something to one person, like you're doing a so-and-so, whatever their, most undesirable characteristic of the lifting is what they get attributed to them. Happened to Ken Clark, poor guy. And I remember he was actually finishing up his career when I was starting mine, and his was far more illustrious. But in any case, the answer to his question is, have I ever had a problem with clarking? And the short answer is no. Okay, Greg? No, I've never had that problem. I've only clarked twice.
Yeah, I would say my experience with it is extremely minimal, and the only couple of times I can recall doing it have been like in relation to an injury.
Right.
Where that
so
was.
So you saved yourself because you realized that was, a fruitless endeavor as you're pulling the bar. You're like, I know the one time I did it was with 102.5. That tells you how long ago it was because we were still on that system. And the bar was barely moving, let's just be honest. Like I had done 97.5 and I went to 102.5 and I'd had a back injury.
Yeah.
This was like right as I was ending my career. I had a back injury and that bar was moving, if it was moving, so slow that there's no way it was going to have the speed for me to even be able to get under
if it. Was moving.
It was pretty much a life-saving, decision to not go under. And then I did it recently, but that's because now I'm just stubborn and old and I try to do weights that I haven't prepared for. So like I haven't pulled a weight, but then I'll pull it to clean it, but I haven't even done pulls with it. So like it shouldn't even be happening. And So it's happened to me recently.
And that's what made me, what I just thought of from this question is, he said he never used to do it, but how much has he improved since that period of time? In other words,
these 90 to 100% weights may be heavier than what he was working with before. And he's just he might be in a realm of weights that are actually heavy.
Right. He might have been limited more by technique or mobility, things like that 6 months ago. And now he's more limited by actual strength, which means that it requires a lot more commitment to pull under 90 to 100% than it did previously. So in that sense, it's an apples and oranges kind of thing where you can't really say, well, your mindset has changed. It's a physical issue with the weights. If that's not the case, he mentions, maybe it's a recovery thing. You may be trying to lift intensities that you shouldn't be lifting at that time. I mean, I see this a lot, and I see it a lot with people who do my programming because So much of the time I'll have them go to, say, heavy single snatch and clean and jerk on Saturdays, just like, my coach Mike Bergner had us do so much of the time. And what I try to explain to people in these programs over and over and over and over, and what they oftentimes just absolutely refuse to understand, is that a heavy single doesn't mean PR or PR attempt. It doesn't even mean 90% sometimes. A heavy single sometimes is going to be low 80%, and you're going to feel like absolute dog shit, and that's fine. That's not the point necessarily of the heavy single on that day. And so if you're in a part of a training cycle where you're beating yourself to death with high volume squats, pulls, that sort of thing, where you're doing, reps or complexes, things like that, you're not physically prepared to do singles at 90 to 100%. And so if you go try to do them, well, guess what? They're going to feel impossible, because they probably are. And if that's the case, then aborting the lift halfway through, like Ursula said, is more of a self-preservation action than mental weakness. It may be an absolute mistake to be even attempting those weights. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing to consider is that if it's a legitimate thing where you are physically prepared to be taking these weights at this time, then yes, it's definitely a confidence issue. It's a mental issue. And there's actually just posted an article yesterday about some strategies to kind of work through this stuff. Was there something you wanted to say real quick?
No, I was going to say, are your numbers dictating that should be easy? Like, so can you do 85 for a set of minimum 2, hopefully, 3. If you can do a set of 3 85, you're missing your 90, then it might be you.
Yeah, that's a problem. It's you.
Yeah, that's a problem. Or if you can do 87 for doubles, but then you miss your 90 or 92, that might be you. So, you're talking about the preparedness. You mentioned both the volume and load, like in areas or portions of your cycle where that's really high. Like you said, you shouldn't even be attempting those numbers unless your coach has written a program where there was a number of days of rest leading up to that, so that it is doable. Sure. You just don't try. And if you do some sort of a program like my old coach that I just mentioned, he was Bulgarian, and we used to do a lot of the Bulgarian waves. And we're basically working up to a minimum, not really a maximum. And it was usually land somewhere about 85%. Like, that was the number that I could do on any day. Some days I could do 90, 95. Some days I could break a PR. But generally I was hitting somewhere between, like 82 to 87% for singles consistently. I was really working up to a minimum, not a maximum. Like, that's right. My minimum lift when I'm not rested. And then you would hope that when you get some rest, your numbers would go up significantly. It wasn't always the case, and that's one of the reasons I didn't really I don't subscribe to programming strictly in a Bulgarian style. I combine it with the Russian style, because then I can assure that when I put in the waves, the athlete can get to something in the 90% range for several singles, right? And I've assured that by making sure they've done doubles and triples at 85. And once I see that, I know that those singles are a go with minimal rest. So anyways, I was just going to say, like, has the workout predicated that those should even be possible? And if not, like, just if we all went in right now and just put 90% on the bar without adequate preparation, whether it's going to happen or not might be some kind of I'm stubborn as shit, so I'll probably try to make it happen. It might hurt myself in the process, right? So you don't want to put numbers on the bar that the program hasn't dictated you're ready for.
Yeah. So, well, let's assume.
And then you do mess with your own head.
Well, yeah,
you mess
exactly.
With your own
it makes
head.
it worse.
Clarking is the cardinal sin of weightlifting. I am not even kidding. Like, somebody in the room when I'm training or watching a training session Clarks, something inside me just boils over and I want to choke them. I'm like, you have just fucked it up for fucking everybody, you fuck. Like, it is not to, hold on, what's this guy's name?
Peter.
I'm not referring to you, Peter. I'm just saying, hopefully Peter doesn't train with other people.
Hopefully Peter doesn't go, like, kill himself now.
No, Peter's going to get past it because he's going to do 87 for doubles now instead. Until he has the confidence to hit 90 no matter what. He's going to have to talk himself into it. But it really is like the cardinal sin in weightlifting because of what it does to the atmosphere. Would you not agree with that?
Yeah, but atmosphere aside, for your own sake, you can't make it a habit. That's the thing is, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, the more times you do it, the more of a habit it becomes, the more you expect it, and the more you do it. And it just turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so if you find yourself in a position where you're clerking a bunch, you have got to make a change. Stop doing what you're doing because it's very obviously not working and you're making the problem worse. Well,
then you come to expect it. You're like, oh, between 90 and 100, I Clark. It's like you said, a self-fulfilling prophecy. You've already said that that's what's going to happen at those numbers. And so it's, such a psychological detriment to go in there. Oh, today I have 90 to 100. Well, I'm going to Clark. He knows he does it. It's like he knows he's going to do it. And there's almost, I think when you miss a lot of lifts, no matter how you miss them, you make it acceptable to miss lifts to yourself. And to me, that's maybe sin number 2.
Right.
Making it okay to miss lifts.
Well, someone posted on...
You don't want to throw fits or whatever, but you also don't want to just be like, it's all right.
No, it's not all right. You're a terrible fucking person.
No.
Someone asked Amy Hay the other day on Instagram, like, how often do you miss? She's like, well, I hardly ever miss because, my coach gives me the right weights. And, it was somewhat facetious, but it's true.
A little bit, but that's absolutely true.
Yeah, you can't, if you're missing 30% of your lifts, you're doing something terribly wrong. And it is that you get good at whatever you practice. And if you miss a lot, you're practicing missing, and you develop an expectation that you're going to miss, and you basically end up with this tolerance of missing, which shouldn't exist. But so let's just assume, for the sake of helping Peter out, that this is not physical, that it's purely mental, that these are lifts that he should be able to make at this point. And then I can give you a few different ideas to try, Peter, but make sure that you're not trying these when you shouldn't be able to make lifts of this weight, because it's not going to help you, and then it's just going to make it worse. So, number 1 would be what I would call progressive waves. So let's say you're working up to a heavy single. Rather than just working straight up to it, you're going to work up close to it, back off a little bit, work up a little farther, back off a little bit, work up all the way. So you might take 3 waves to get to or past that number. The
Bulgarian wave system actually was designed like that. That's how I originally would do it. The first 100% for the day was lower than the second one, which was lower than the third one.
Well,
that's exactly how.
Yeah, but that only works if you don't truly push that first 100%.
That's right. That's absolutely right. You got to know when to back down. When to come down.
In other words, it's not really 100%, and that's where it gets confusing.
No, none of them are 100%. None of them maybe 100%. It's just 100% of what you can do that day.
Right. Well, but see, it's not though, because if you beat it in the next 2 waves, then you've proven that's not 100% of what you can do that day. So there is a lot of gotcha. Kind of judgment that goes in on the part of the lifter and the coach, which is why it's so difficult. Yeah. The other one is,
as a coach, have to write the percents and say, okay, first set go up to 87%, come back down. Next wave go up to 90%, come back down. Third wave go up to 92%. Boom.
Right.
Come back down, do a double.
Yeah. So each one of those waves, you get a little closer to that number, and then eventually to it and or past it. But you're also spending a lot of time right around that threshold of where you shit the bed. And so you're gaining that confidence in that way too. And so the next one I actually call threshold training. So, let's say that, 90 kilos, that's where you just flip out and you absolutely cannot snatch 90 kilos. But maybe you can get to 85 without a problem. So instead of going to 85 and then jumping to 88 or 90 and missing over and over and over again, why not work to 85 or 87 or 88 right around there and doing, 3 to 6 singles there? Because if it truly is a mental thing, you should be able to do multiple sets at a weight right below that threshold. And then, over the course of weeks, you work up a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher, until that weight just becomes very routine. And you can keep pushing that threshold higher and higher, so that it's not this huge barrier in your mind. Like, every single time I go to 90 kilos, everything falls apart. It's like, well, I did 85 5 times, I did 87 5 times, then I did 89 5 times, so who gives a shit about 90? And then maybe you don't go to 90, maybe you go to 91. Some people literally get these numbers stuck in their heads, and it's so ridiculous, and you can know consciously that it's ridiculous, but you put one more kilo on the bar and all of a sudden they'll make it. It's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever seen. It drives me crazy.
Numbers,
but it's true.
too, like, we've skipped numbers. Let's say you have a thing with 90. I've gotten to the point where I was like, fuck it, you're never trying 90 again. We're going to go 91.
Exactly.
Like, you got such a hang up. So we go 89, 91.
You're too stupid for 90.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I mean, 90 has this mental, it's a mental block with it of some sort. Let's go to something that you don't have that association with. And so even if it's more, I mean, and it works often because they're just so mentally hung up on one specific number.
Yeah.
It's weird how it happens at like zeros and fives, like it's 70 or 75 or 80 or 85.
Well, it's usually that's because that's a typical weight.
Of course, when I listen. Well, yeah, and also we used to have that 2.5 system where everything was 2.5, so 5s and 10s is where we do most of it. I see, a lot of coaches still adhere to that because we were not used to having all these, 81, 82, 83, 84. But, it's
so
worth
many
taking
options.
this point. So many options.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I had a thought, but then I started talking about other shit and I forgot it.
Okay, good.
Useless.
So another one would be on the minute singles.
I was supposed to ask you about clusters.
I never really prescribe clusters because most of the time doubles and triples turn into what people would call a cluster anyway. And so I don't adhere to super strict doubles and triples most of the time. Like, it's got to be within a reason, but I've seen people.
You're not like you can't unstrap.
Well, I mean, I do think that with a double or a triple, you should probably keep your hands on the bar. Dropping the bar, walking away, retightening your belt, that kind of stuff is excessive. It's not necessarily a deal breaker every single time. Like, it's a case by case thing for me, but typically that's way out of line. But on the minute stuff, which I don't know, I hesitate to say that Joe Mills created it, but he definitely is the American coach that popularized it. And he would do 5 singles on the minute at 3 different weights, increasing weights, and then potentially work up, 5 more singles off the clock, basically up to a heavy single. But so there's a lot of different ways you can structure that sort of thing on the minute training, but it's really, really good for technical consistency and also for getting people to not overthink the lifts because they really don't have time. They do a lift, they drop the bar, they go get some chalk, they pace on the platform for 30 seconds and they have to go again. Versus doing a lift that felt kind of hard, then sitting down on the bench for 3 to 5 minutes and thinking about how hard it was and imagining all the things that can go wrong and how they're terrible people and, their girlfriend's embarrassed to watch them lift and all this kind of crap that goes on in people's dumb little heads. And so working with on the minute stuff, and then again over time creeping those on the minute weights up and up and up and up. I've had lifters finish their last 3 to 5 singles on the minute in like the low 90%. Mm-hmm.
I had a guy break a PR. You remember my athlete that I was telling you about that's a coach and he's a real good coach? Do you know why I remember?
Because you talk about him every single episode.
So let's do the same as David. Anyways, he one time broke his PR. I think we did like 15 or 18 minutes at like, when we started, I started them at, I want to say 85%. It's a Snatch Game. Have I ever told you about the Snatch Game? So
I don't think the one that you're talking about, no.
No, yeah, but shut up. So 85%, and we would start hitting singles, and I think we did 15 minutes. And so it was on the minute, so they would hit, and if you missed 85, then you have to drop down to 80%, but then you had to do a double. If you missed one of them at the 80% double, then you had to drop down to 75%, you had to do a triple. If you miss one of those, you have to drop down to 70% and do a set of 4. Nobody ever gets down there.
If you miss one of those, you have to quit.
Yeah, nobody gets down that low because it's just, so undesirable that people actually make lifts. The one way you can make a lifter make a lift is to tell them you can go up and do a single and then they'll hit it, or you can stay here and do a double and they'll be like, no, I'd rather do a single.
Yeah, no shit.
And if you tell them if you miss it, you're gonna have to come down and do a double, they will not miss it. That's just the makeup of a weightlifter. Like, they're not gonna miss anything if they know they're gonna have to do more reps as a punishment. So we did it, and after like 18 minutes or so, he started going up. Like, after we hit the 15-minute mark, he started going up on the minute, and he broke a damn PR.
Yeah, that's weird.
Like that, yeah, well, that's not really his PR. And what it tells me is that when he misses, it's because he let shit get in his head, and there was no time for shit to get in his head because he was busy for 18 fucking minutes.
Right. He's lifting and loading the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think people who have not done on-the-minute stuff before are like, oh, there's no way I could PR because I'd be so exhausted. You'll be surprised. I mean, sometimes you're not going to be able to get up to, 90+%. Sometimes you're not going to PR, but sometimes all of a sudden everything clicks, and I think it happens a lot more with on-the-minute stuff preceding a heavy single than without most of the time.
I always felt really mechanized when I would do that. Like, I was doing the exact same motion over and over. It just really
that's the whole point, is you're focused and consistent. And that's what people miss, is they do a set, then look on Instagram, and then do a set, and then go fucking talk to some girl. It's like, good God, man.
Status.
Yeah. So another one that you also kind of mentioned it was, using unusual weights. So like, we all have pretty habitual weight increases. We all take the same weights as we work up in a snatch or a clean and jerk, 99% of the time. And so when you have those patterns like that, and then you have the pattern of expecting a miss at a certain weight, well, if you keep just repeating that same thing, you just are further ingraining that pattern and those expectations. So, rather than going all 5s and 0s, whatever it is, go 2s and 3s or 8s and 7s, whatever. So instead of, 100 to 105, you go 102 to 107 or 103 to 108. Things like that, where you just have different numbers. And of course, now with the 1 kilo rule, like you said, you've got a fucking million options. It's not just 0, 2.5, and 5.
I mean, that's usually something you reserve for youth girls, but going up by 1 kilo at a time. What do you think about that? Because, I mean, come on, one of the things that happens when you make a 5 kilo jump, especially if it was already heavy 5 kilos below that, is not only the expectation that it's going to be heavier, but the fact that it is heavier.
Yeah, it feels heavy the second you start.
Yeah, and there's a more notable difference. That's one of the problems with big jumps, is that there's just such a notable difference between what you did before and what you did. It's one of the reasons, how, and nobody's brought this up, but like when we have to go back in the warm-up room and there's 12 attempts or 15 attempts between your first and second set, like, some athletes prefer to do power versions of the lift. Others will do, some sort of wave where they'll come back down, they'll come back up, and others will do like pulls. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's arguments for each of that. We should talk about that sometime.
We should. I hate doing pulls. They feel so fucking heavy.
Yeah. Well, I think
I hate doing anything, really. I just want to.
I think a lot of coaches hate having someone do pulls because it's a unconsummated lift. So now you're like, I don't know, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's an incomplete lift, and so you didn't finish it because you didn't finish it. It just kind of lingering out there in a coach's mind. I mean, that's how I feel about it too. But I have athletes that's what they prefer. And I mean, the athlete preference I defer to other than my own in any case. Well, not every case, but in that case for sure, because they're the ones that are having to compete. And they know what works for them very often. And if, of course, it doesn't, then you're like, okay, now I get to overrule if it fucks up. But as long as it works for them, you can't really say anything. I remember Zygmunt hated pulls when the warm-up room. Anyways, we're not talking about that, but we should sometime.
We will.
And we're talking about pulls between lifts when you have a long period of rest, which happens always at the World Championships.
Well, it happens anywhere where you have a bunch of really similar ability people. Yeah, it happens more and more at our national meets because you've got 20 fucking people lifting the same weight.
And what's happening now is like, so it used to only be like at world championships that you had that issue because everybody was back to back like 1 kilo apart in their total. But now that we have, J sessions, which we're, hopefully won't have anymore. But when we did, like all those people would come in with the same total. And I looked at that and I was like, shit, you've got to be ready to coach pretty much like you're coaching at a Worlds. I wonder if these people know what to do because there was a lot of new coaches and that was not an experience that you might have at a local meet usually.
Yeah. Oh, I remember I had one guy, 77. I think it was his first or second national meet, and he was in maybe the D session or C session. And I went and I looked at the board, and there were, no joke, 8 guys opening at 120 in the snatch. And I was like, okay, we're going to go to either 119 or 121. This is stupid.
Sure. That's just a smart thing to do with your athletes. So you have some pretty, the problem is that you don't, we will guess that 1/3 of those 20s are going to have a second attempt at 120.
Right.
Well, that's the other problem. None, or it could be all.
That's the other problem is that there are way more misses because there are way more new lifters now who don't have any idea how to select openers.
And you don't have any idea of knowing who they are and who they're not.
Exactly.
We used to know what everybody could do.
Right.
Well, I mean, and you still kind of do in the A session. You still have an idea. I don't know. I've gotten in trouble thinking I knew what everybody was going to do.
Oh, I've definitely been surprised more than once.
Once I got in trouble. And after that, I learned my lesson.
Yeah.
I'm not going to guess shit. I'm just going to go by what I see.
You have to guess.
Well, but I mean, yeah, well. Not like
it's all guessing until they actually put the weight in.
Nostradamus and that shit, and I was wrong.
Oh, so fun.
I happened once. And I was like, never. Anyways.
Okay, well, to steer back to the thing we were talking about 20 minutes ago, baby steps, small increases, absolutely. And and the thing too is that, decreasing jumps, the heavier you get, the smaller your jump should be. You can't just keep taking 10 or 5 kilo jumps from start to finish. And taking 1 to 3 kilo jumps, sometimes you have to do it. It's not that big of a deal. And that goes into the whole thing too about, people always go for a 5 kilo PR. It's like, well, that's just stupid.
No,
why not go for 1 to 3 kilos?
Yeah. Oh, they're so bad. Kirby White had told one of the guys, I actually told David, like, just first break your PR with the 1 kilo, then go for whatever.
Yeah.
That's how you just keep nickeling or pennying your max up.
Yeah. So another one, I think I have a couple more here. Another one would be taking a break from doing these heavy singles that you suck at and doing doubles and triples or doing complexes, and really pushing that for a while. And like Ursula was saying, if you can do a double with 85 to 90%, you're pretty good. You should be able to do a triple with 85% for the most part. There's some cases you're going to do a triple with 90%. And if you can do some weird complex, snatch or clean and jerk complex at a really significant weight, you're good for a big single in the strict competition lift. But those, because they're so much different, you kind of get yourself out of that position of freaking out about the snatch or the clean or the jerk itself at those heavy weights. There's so much more to focus on. It's a totally new pattern. And so you spend a few weeks doing that instead, and usually you can come back and get conditioned for singles again, and you'll be totally fine. And then I guess
that all has to do with, building confidence in different ways, and that's the real way to fix it, because then it's a real confidence that you're developing.
Right.
And that's one of the things, like, you have to approach a bar if you're going for a heavy lift. One of the things that I always loved about John North was that every time he missed a lift, he looked completely amazed, astonished, and perplexed as to how he missed it. Which tells you that he really believed, as he walked up to that bar, that there was no way he was going to miss that lift. Because he was completely like, he always looked confused, like, how the hell did I miss that?
I actually used to tell people, remember the cartoons where, the person would run off the cliff and they wouldn't fall until they looked down and realized they weren't on the cliff?
Like the Roadrunner?
That's what I compared John North to in that sense, where it was like he absolutely, like you said, 100% could not believe that he wouldn't make this lift. And that goes a long way.
It does. It certainly does. And that confidence, you have to walk up to the bar, not like, I'm going to try this. That's why coaches get all bent out of shape and you say, can I try something?
No.
Like, no, motherfucker, you can do it.
Or go to bed.
But don't even use the word try in front of me. That's like cardinal sin number 3. Don't use it. We've got like a whole list. We should make a t-shirt. Don't try.
Quit trying.
Don't try. Do it.
Either do it or quit.
Do it. Yeah, do it or get out of my face.
Well, so speaking of confidence, that's another one is doing specific exercise to work on specific elements to develop confidence. So, things
that's why he says high block, right? Because he's thinking like, he put
high blocks.
Didn't he put something about high block?
Yeah.
Because, obviously he thinks it's a turnover issue.
Yeah, I don't think that's particularly going to help, but.
Well, I think you might break his wrist because if you balk on that shit.
Yeah, you're fudged. But if you know specifically, like, okay, snatch, well, I'm not confident in being able to support weight overhead. Okay, well, you need to push your overhead squat and your snatch balance, or for jerks, jerk support, recoveries, jerks behind the neck, hold those weights overhead in the bottom position for 3 to 5 seconds, which everybody hates. If your pull, everything you pull feels super, super heavy, well, you probably need to work on getting your pull stronger. All those things, or when you get under a clean, you can get under it, but all of a sudden it feels like you're getting crushed. Well, maybe you need more squats, more front squats, pause front squats, clean rack supports, things like that, where you're getting more confident, feeling those weights and being able to support them. So that's not what you're thinking about. If you walk up to a snatch and all you're thinking about is, I'm probably going to drop this on my head because I'm not strong enough to hold it, you're not going to fucking snatch it.
Yeah, you'd be a fool to go underneath it.
It's amazing how many people will pull under snatches they shouldn't, but you just, if you have that doubt in your mind, like, you just need to walk away from the bar. And to me, it's better to not even touch the bar than to start a lift and stop partway through. Like, if you're not committed to it, don't even start. All right. I think that's probably what I have for that. Didn't you say at the beginning that you didn't know what to say?
Yeah, I was like, I don't have anything to say on this except for no.
Except for no.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. I do. I see it in other athletes. I have a fit when I miss a lift.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm like, how did I not make that? You know what I mean? And one of the guys in the gym says that I have like a 3, like I'll miss it once, and then I'm like pissed, and then I miss it again, then I'm really fucking pissed, and then it happens. He's like, she'll make it better. Just let the build up occur. And it's weird because, obviously we know that 3 is it.
Right.
So like, what does that tell you? If I knew that 2 was it, I'd probably get a lot more piss between 1 and 2 and make it on 2.
Exactly.
Or even better, if I thought 1 was it, which I should, we all should. We should all think it's a 1 or nothing. And I've stopped people. I've said, look, you get 1 shot at this shit. 1 shot. And they're like, no, it's a 3 miss rule. I'm like, nah.
No, yeah. No, I do that all the time.
I just made that shit up, and now my new shit that I'm making up is a 1 miss rule.
So one of my favorite stories.
You're like, you're done. And then they beg you to go, and you're like, no.
No, if you could have done it, you would have done it the first time. It's your own fault that you fucking suck. So Oscar Chaplin told a story one time when he was back at the training center, and I don't know what athlete and which coach it was, but they were getting ready for some meet.
I bet I can figure it out.
Huh?
So tell the story. I bet I can figure it out.
Probably. So this athlete was snatching and kept missing. And the coach is like, stop. You need to stop. So he misses it 6 times and makes it on the 7th. And he turns to the coach and he's like, see, I made it. And the coach is like, yeah, congratulations. You just bombed out at 2 Olympics.
I bet I know who it is.
I have my guess too, but okay. Let's see here. We're gonna talk about James. This is a tough one to answer too, I think. But I'm kind of curious.
I feel like we've been on for an hour.
Well, we've been on for 39 minutes.
Oh.
Cool.
39.24.
I know you want to get done with this thing fast, but good God, we've only answered one question.
I know. I was like, God, we talked that
impatient.
Okay, let me up so I can see what the question is.
Well, I'll read it to you. James asks, I've noticed that one scheme for deciding how much weight to use is to do a number of sets at a given weight or percentage, like 5 sets of 3 at 80%. Another is to work up to a set at a given weight or percentage, like working up to a double at 85%. I have all the Catalyst books, thank you, James, but one of the things I still really wonder about is how to decide how much weight to use in order to make steady progress and not stall out by using too little weight, or conversely not burn out or getting injured by using too much. What are the strengths and weaknesses of either approach, straight sets at a weight or working up to one set at a certain weight? What are the best applications for either? Well, James, this is pretty much one of the all-time most important questions of program design for anything. If there were a really simple formulaic answer, we'd all be really good coaches.
We'd all have world records.
I'm curious to hear your answer, because mine is probably really vague and not that helpful. It basically is like experience.
Yeah, well, but we do both. That's the thing. And some people benefit more from working up to a higher percentage, and others, I think if you're a more seasoned lifter, then you can do something in a program like, you have to do something like the 5 sets of 3 to get to the 85 doubles. You have to do the doubles to get to the 90% singles. Then you got to do, the 87 doubles to get to a 95 single. Like you use, a progression of preparing them for the next set. And I think you can do that both ways. So I don't know that, I just think that certain individuals respond better to less work. So I think someone who is more developed would be better off doing, for the sake of injury prevention and making sure they're not accumulating too much load, to go up to like a heavy double. One heavy double at 85% might serve them as well as 3 sets of 3 at 80% serves somebody who's still refining technique. I don't think my athletes do 4 and 5 sets of work, but we normally see that either singles or in their pulls and squats when we're trying to get stronger or develop a condition base in the first 4 to 6 weeks of their training. Because 5 sets of 3, like in a snatch, that's a lot of stress on your wrist. So for me, I would look at the athlete and say this might benefit, 5 sets of 3 and the snatch at 80% is great for someone who's not really near their actual 100%. That's a lot of stress on the wrist of a Derek Johnson who has a wide snatch grip. And I have to consider all the other work we're doing, like snatch balance. So he would benefit more from going up to an 85% double than staying at 80% and doing multitude of sets, just because he's actually really close to his 100%.
Yeah,
real
well,
100%.
I mean, 5 triples at 80% in either one of the competition lifts is a lot.
Brutal.
That's really, I mean, I would argue that a lot of lifters couldn't even do that.
Well,
depending on how advanced they are, because if 80% is a genuine 80%, that's really hard. If their 80% is really more like 70 to 75% because their 100% isn't a true 100%, then that might not be a big deal at all. But
or if they're learning, they're just, this is their second, third year, and
well, that's what I'm saying, is because their max isn't a true physical max.
It's a skill max,
right? And so I would agree that it's absolutely individual. And I use both methods. I think most often what I do is that I will start a mesocycle with 4 to 5 sets at a single weight. And the next week we're going to work up to 3 to 4 sets at a higher weight. And then we're going to basically each week as we progress, we're going to do fewer sets, which is, a fairly obvious thing to do.
Right.
And how exactly you do it, again, just kind of depends on the athlete. Like you said, is you have to know that person. And then part of it too is that, when you've coached someone for a long time, you have records. You remember the stuff that has worked and hasn't worked. And that's the stuff you go back to and you use it again, but you refine it. you instead of making major changes like, instead of 5 sets of 3, I'm going to work up to, a max triple, 1 set of 3 or whatever it is. You don't make dramatic changes like that anymore. You say, okay, well, instead of 5 sets of 3, maybe we're going to try 3 sets of 3, or, whatever the case is. And that's how you refine it for each person. So there really isn't one way that works for everybody. And I mean, that should be pretty obvious when you see that people are successful on more Soviet style programming, which tends to be, more volume, more reps, at least early on, versus people who do well in a more of a Bulgarian style program, which is nearly all singles, maybe a few doubles here and there, very low volume, but very high intensity. So pretty much everything works at some point for some people. And the trick is finding what works best for each.
Russian style programming works when you're trying to adapt the athlete to having the higher intensity loads come. So, I mean, we all kind of put our athletes through some sort of a conditioning cycle, which is, a strength conditioning cycle, really, where we're getting them to be able to lift more weight for reps. And then we start pulling out the volume, and you end up with something that starts to look closer to the Bulgarian system as you start hitting more singles at higher percentages. And that's when I naturally will bring in that weight system. I've moved to doing I'll put 82 to 87%, where I give them
a range.
Yeah, give them a range in which they can work, and we'll say, okay, 3 sets of 2 at 82 to 87%. Well, some are going to do at 3 at 82%. Some are going to do 82%, 85, 85. Some are going to go 82, 85, 87. And that's their 3 sets. So then they end up with 1 set, but we've done that work in a particular range,
right?
Which then addresses a group and, the tendency. And what if somebody's just beat up that day because they had to work longer hours or whatever? Staying at 82% is not going to be that much different than hitting 1 single and 1 double at 87%.
So the other thing I would say with this is that on basically every scale, macro to micro, you're working from, lighter weights, more reps, more volume, to heavier weights, lower volume, fewer reps. So even in a single mesocycle, for example, we may start with 5 triples, and then gradually work, heavier and heavier, so that the initial 5 triples, you may be doing something like 70 to 75%. It may be very light and pretty easy, and that's fine. You're kind of you're establishing that base for the next few weeks, and then you work from there. And so he says, what are the strengths and weaknesses of either approach? And I don't necessarily know that they're totally distinct approaches, or they're just kind of parts of the spectrum of a single approach. I mean, or unless he's talking about just working to rep maxes all the time, like a single max set, every single week in and week out, kind of like, so like Kyle Pierce, for example, his basic template where you would work, basically 10 rep maxes for a couple weeks, and then 5 rep maxes for a couple weeks, then 3 rep maxes for a couple weeks. But I think what you find,
don't they go for like a month at a time though?
I think he usually says 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah. But I think what you find with people who actually do that in practice, what that turns out to be is that you still generally have a progression. Like, they don't push quite as hard on the first week. They push a little harder on the second week. They push the hardest on the third week, and then they back off a little bit.
So you might go 60, 65, 70, 75%.
Right.
Which would be a lot for
which is basically what you end up programming anyway. So it's basically you're relying on either someone else telling you beforehand what to do, or you're relying on feel and your own judgment. Because people who are new to that kind of programming, they're just going to go all out week 1. But then guess what? Week 2 and 3, they're probably going to do less than they did on the first week. And so they kind of learn to manipulate that a little bit and end up with a very, similar approach, in the end, than what they would have done had they prescribed the weights. So I guess my point is that all that stuff has its place for just about every lifter, and it's a matter of, like Ursula said, finding what works best for each lifter, and then also just kind of using all of it at the appropriate time, and again, starting generally with more reps, less weight, moving to more weight and fewer reps. So
well, and that's why you can't replace, in terms of coaching. And I mean, it's fantastic that people educate themselves, that they read all the Catalyst books and, look at the Russian training manuals and all of the different resources that we have. I mean, we all do that, but there's just really no substitute for time and practice and for learning that athlete.
Yeah.
You have to learn not just works. I mean, you have to have open lines of communication so that, sometimes you shut them down. They're like, oh, I'm dying. And you're like, you're not dead. You're lying. You got to try to differentiate between just like they have a whiny personality or they're seriously, need to back off. And that's one of the good things about a group program is that you have, if you have similar issues in multiple people, it tells you the program needs to change. Like that feedback gives you that clear indication. But you can't, there's no substitute for time and experience. You just have to go out and start practicing.
Right.
So, I think we've all referred to our first athletes as guinea pigs at some point. Or ourselves, like a lot of us guinea pigs.
Not
ourselves.
Just the first ones, pretty much all of them. Come on. But yeah, and that's the thing is people ask like, okay, well, if I'm doing 5 sets of 3, what weight should I use? And it's like, well, it's going to depend. I would say that it's probably in the low to mid 70s for a first week. Yeah. But again, it depends. And that's why it's so important to have that experience, to be able to look back and say, hey, the last cycle I did with this athlete, we did these weights. Well, he or she is better now. We're going to bump these weights up. And in that way, it's this constant progression versus trying to figure out a formula. If I have 3 sets of 3, it's going to be at, 78%. But if I have 5 sets of 3, it's going to be at 76%. And if I have 4 sets of 2, it has to be at 82%. You can't make it formulaic like that. It just doesn't work, unfortunately. I wish it did, because I'd be way better at coaching. If I could just read and find out, give me the manual and I'll just memorize it. You really
can't say a certain percentages at certain reps and sets should indicate that they can do a next percentage at certain reps and sets. So, if you can do 80 for 5 sets of 3, you should be able to do 85 for 4 sets of 2 or 3 sets of 2. Like that should predicate the next step.
It should, but again, that's also pretty vague too, because again, you have a lot of variation among athletes on that stuff. You're going to have athletes who are far better at doing higher reps at a given percentage than others, and vice versa. So it's predictable on the most general, broad scale, and then the more specific it gets, the less predictable it becomes. So you do have to have that experience with that specific athlete to really dial in that programming. And that's the hard part, especially taking on a new athlete who's experienced, when you're like, okay, well, we're just going to kind of fuck around for a few months and figure out how you work.
Yeah, where you're at. Talking about that part of it, and I know that Zygmunt used to write his programs just on a piece of paper. Like, that's how my older coaches used to do it as well. Now everybody's gotten tied to creating spreadsheets. Like, the fancier and more complicated the spreadsheet, the more people feel like it's a better program. It's really interesting to me.
It is.
I think some of the best programs I've ever had were done daily, but with pencil. You know what I mean? In a book.
On a cocktail napkin.
I actually have all sorts of inserts in my books of various pieces of paper because, you didn't bring a book or something like that, which is sin number 4 or something. Having new athletes writing their program, not utilizing percentages at all, just writing the actual weights down.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty common. And okay, I'm just putting it out there because I want to tell people it doesn't have to be a percent of a something, because if you have like a new and skill max that's not really indicative, it may not be best to go with percentages. I know that when I do send newer athletes percentages and we're in the gym, half the time I'm like, that's too easy, go up.
Right.
When they're doing a double, it's like, 85 or 87%. And you're like, no, it's still too easy.
Yeah.
And it just tells you that they're nowhere near their real max. Yeah. And so, an elite athlete, if we were doing that, we'd be, close to competition shape.
Oh, shit, yeah. I'd love to be able to do that every day. Yeah, and I mean, the more of a beginner you are, the more that stuff has to be by feel and by coach's judgment. And so if you are using percentages, those have to be, what I try to tell people is it's not really a percentage of your max. It's more like, this is a guideline to tell us what kind of effort we're expecting. You know, if I give you 70 to 75%, obviously you shouldn't be dying unless we're doing sets of 10. You know, but if we're doing snatch, clean and jerk triples and I give you 70%, that should be fairly easy. You know what I mean? If I give you 80%, maybe we don't stay at a technical 80%, but we know it's going to be a pretty tough triple. And so it's not that percentages are necessarily not useful at all. It's just that you kind of have to use them more as guidelines than as actual rigid prescriptions in those cases. All right. Well, did we beat
we
those
always say
two
things
to
like
death?
no program should be written in stone.
No, that's just inconvenient.
So, yeah, I think we made some.
Well, it really went out on a whimper on that one, huh?
Yeah, I picked up my phone.
It's a rough start and a rough ending, guys. It got done. It's a weird day. Yeah.
It got done.
I
taught all morning.
Yeah.
So usually when we do these things, I'm not, haven't been thinking for 8 hours straight.
I try to think as little as possible prior to these. Just do it live.
Brain cells for the.
Yes. All right. Well, we got it in under the wire. Made it. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Happy Valentine's Day.
You probably should be in the gym.
Right. For Valentine's Day, you get squats.
Yes. Everybody likes that. Please go review this thing on iTunes, Google Play, whatever you listen on. Tell a friend. Tell your family. Tell people you don't even like, because maybe they'll become better people and you'll be able to like them after they listen to this show a few times.
You'll have weightlifting in common.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you again for listening. Appreciate it. We'll hopefully talk to you next time, more on time.
See you guys.
Bye now.
Bye.